In the glittering world of high society, where every gesture carries weight and every smile hides secrets, a single piece of jewelry would become the catalyst for a drama that no one saw coming. When Catherine extended her hand that autumn evening, the diamond on her finger caught more than just the chandelier's light. It captured the attention of everyone in the room, especially Camilla, whose reaction would echo through social circles for months to come. What started as an innocent moment of pride would unravel years of hidden tensions, buried rivalries, and family secrets that some had hoped would never see the light of day. The ring wasn't just a symbol of love. It was a key that would unlock doors better left closed, revealing truths that would shake the very foundations of relationships that had taken decades to build. This is the story of how one woman's happiness became another's nightmare, and how a simple display of affection triggered a chain of events that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. The autumn breeze carried the scent of dying leaves through the open windows of the Meridian Country Club, where the annual charity gala was in full swing. Catherine Miller smoothed down her emerald silk dress and checked her reflection one last time in the powder room mirror. Her heart fluttered with nervous excitement as she twisted the stunning engagement ring on her finger, still unable to believe it was real. The 3-carat diamond solitaire caught the light beautifully, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the marble walls. James had proposed just 3 days ago during their weekend getaway to Martha's Vineyard, and Catherine still felt like she was floating on cloud 9. At 32, she had begun to wonder if true love would ever find her. But James Morrison had swept in her life like a fairy tale prince, complete with his charming smile and successful law practice. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the powder room, immediately spotting James across the crowded ballroom. He was engaged in conversation with several prominent members of the community, his tall frame and confident demeanor making him stand out even in this room full of accomplished individuals. When he caught her eye and winked, Catherine felt her cheeks flush with warmth. The evening had been planned for weeks. Catherine worked as the head coordinator for the Morrison Foundation, a charitable organization founded by James's late father, and tonight's gala was their biggest fundraising event of the year. She had spent months organizing every detail, from the floral arrangements to the silent auction items. But now all she could think about was sharing her wonderful news with her colleagues and friends. As she made her way through the crowd, stopping to chat with various guests and ensuring everything was running smoothly, Catherine couldn't help but notice the curious glances directed toward her left hand. Several people had already congratulated her, having spotted the ring immediately. The news was spreading quickly through the intimate gathering of about 200 guests. Near the bar, she spotted her closest friend and colleague, Sarah Bennett, deep in conversation with a group of board members. Sarah had been Catherine's confidant through every relationship disaster and career triumph over the past 5 years. When their eyes met, Sarah's face lit up with excitement, and she practically rushed over. "Catherine, oh my goodness, let me see it properly," Sarah whispered, grabbing her friend's hand and examining the ring under the crystal chandelier. "It's absolutely gorgeous. I still can't believe James finally popped the question. You two are perfect for each other." Catherine beamed, feeling a surge of happiness at her friend's enthusiasm. "I know, right? I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and it'll all be a dream." He was so romantic about it, too. We were walking along the beach at sunset, and he just got down on one knee right there in the sand. "That's so James," Sarah laughed. "Always the gentleman. Have you set a date yet?" "We're thinking next spring, maybe April or May. Something small and elegant, probably at the Botanical Gardens downtown. James wants to keep it intimate, just close family and friends." As they continued to chat about wedding plans, Catherine noticed a familiar figure approaching from across the room. Camilla Whitmore, the Foundation's longest-serving board member and one of the most influential women in their social circle, was making her way toward them with her characteristic, purposeful stride. At 58, Camilla commanded respect wherever she went, her silver hair always perfectly styled, and her designer wardrobe impeccable. Catherine had always found Camilla somewhat intimidating. The older woman had a way of making people feel scrutinized, as if she were constantly evaluating their worth. Despite working together for several years, their relationship had remained strictly professional, though Catherine had always sensed an underlying tension she couldn't quite identify. "Good evening, ladies," Camilla said as she reached them, her voice carrying its usual authoritative tone. "Catherine, I've been hearing whispers all evening about some exciting news." Catherine felt a flutter of nerves, but managed a bright smile. "Yes, actually, James and I got engaged this past weekend." She extended her hand, allowing Camilla to see the ring properly for the first time. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Camilla's face went completely pale, her eyes widening as they fixed on the diamond. For several long seconds, she stood frozen, her mouth slightly open as if she'd seen a ghost. The color drained from her cheeks so dramatically that Sarah took a step forward, concerned. "Camilla, are you all right?" Sarah asked, but the older woman didn't seem to hear her. Catherine felt a chill run down her spine as she watched Camilla's expression transform from shock to something that looked almost like horror. The woman's hands began to tremble slightly, and she seemed to be struggling to catch her breath. "Where did he get that ring?" Camilla's voice came out as barely a whisper, so quiet that Catherine had to lean closer to hear her. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Catherine asked, confused by the strange question and Camilla's obvious distress. Camilla's eyes snapped up to meet Catherine's, and for a moment there was something wild and desperate in her gaze. "That ring. Where did James get that ring?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Catherine felt completely bewildered. Of all the reactions she had expected to her engagement announcement, this certainly wasn't one of them. She glanced at Sarah, who looked equally confused and concerned. I don't know exactly. He said it was a family heirloom, something that had been in his family for generations." "Why do you ask?" Camilla's face went from pale to ashen, and she actually took a step backward as if Catherine's words had physically struck her. Around them, other guests were beginning to notice the tense exchange, their conversations quieting as they sensed the drama unfolding. "A family heirloom," Camilla repeated slowly, her voice taking on a strange, hollow quality. "Yes, I suppose it would be." Catherine was growing more alarmed by the minute. "Camilla, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Do you know something about this ring?" For a moment, it seemed like Camilla might faint. She swayed slightly on her feet, and Sarah quickly moved to her side, ready to catch her if necessary. The older woman's breathing had become shallow and rapid, and her hands were now visibly shaking. "I need some air," Camilla managed to say, her voice barely audible. "I need to excuse me." Without another word, she turned and walked quickly toward the French doors that led out to the club's terrace, leaving Catherine and Sarah staring after her in complete bewilderment. Several other guests had noticed the abrupt departure, and Catherine could feel their curious eyes on her. "What on earth was that about?" Sarah whispered, still watching the doors where Camilla had disappeared. Catherine looked down at her ring, which suddenly felt heavy on her finger. "I have no idea." She acted like she'd seen a ghost when she saw it. "Do you think there's something wrong with it? Maybe it's stolen or something." "Don't be ridiculous," Sarah said firmly, though she too looked shaken by Camilla's reaction. "James wouldn't give you a stolen ring. There has to be some other explanation." Across the room, James had noticed the commotion and was making his way over to them, concern evident on his handsome face. As he approached, Catherine felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Maybe he would be able to explain Camilla's strange behavior. "What happened over here?" he asked as he reached them. "I saw Camilla rush outside, and she looked like she'd seen a ghost." "That's exactly what we were thinking," Catherine said, reaching for his hand. "James," she had the strangest reaction when I showed her my ring. She went completely white and started asking where you got it. When I told her it was a family heirloom, she looked like she was going to faint. James frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "That's odd. I can't imagine why she would react that way. The ring has been in my family for decades. My grandmother left it to me specifically for when I decided to propose." "Maybe she knew your grandmother?" Sarah suggested. If it's been in your family that long, perhaps they moved in similar social circles. It's possible, James said thoughtfully. My grandmother was quite social in her day. She and my grandfather were involved in a lot of charity work and community events, much like what we do now. But I still don't understand why that would cause such a dramatic reaction. Catherine twisted the ring on her finger, studying it more carefully than she had before. It was undeniably beautiful, with an elegant vintage setting that spoke of a bygone era of craftsmanship. The diamond itself was flawless, catching and reflecting light with stunning brilliance. Looking at it now, she could see why it might evoke strong memories if someone had known its previous owner. Should I go talk to her? Catherine asked, glancing toward the terrace doors. She seemed so upset. Maybe if I explained that I didn't mean to upset her. Let me go, James said, placing a protective hand on Catherine's shoulder. If this has something to do with my family, I should be the one to address it. You stay here and enjoy the party. Don't let Camilla's reaction ruin your special evening. As James walked toward the terrace, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, something that would have far-reaching consequences. The joy and excitement she had felt just moments before was now clouded with uncertainty and a growing sense of unease. Sarah squeezed her arm reassuringly. Try not to worry about it. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe the ring just reminded her of someone from her past, and it caught her off guard. But as Catherine watched James disappear through the French doors, she couldn't escape the feeling that Camilla's reaction was about much more than simple nostalgia. The terror she had seen in the older woman's eyes suggested something far deeper and more troubling than bittersweet memories. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and polite conversation, but Catherine's mind kept returning to that moment when Camilla had first seen her ring. The image of the woman's face draining of color was burned into her memory, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that her engagement had somehow triggered something that had been lying dormant for years. As the night wore on, and James returned with vague assurances that Camilla was fine and had simply felt unwell, Catherine found herself studying the faces around her, wondering what other secrets might be hiding behind the polite smiles and congratulatory words. The ring on her finger, which had started the evening as a symbol of love and happiness, now felt like a key that had accidentally unlocked a door that was meant to stay closed. By the time the last guest had departed and the staff was cleaning up, Catherine was exhausted but still deeply troubled. As she and James walked to their car, she found herself glancing back at the country club, half expecting to see Camilla watching them from one of the windows. The night air was cool against her skin, but the chill she felt came from somewhere much deeper than the autumn breeze. The next morning arrived with an uncomfortable heaviness that Catherine couldn't shake. She sat at her kitchen table, nursing her second cup of coffee and staring at the engagement ring that had caused such a stir the night before. In the gentle morning light streaming through her apartment windows, it looked innocent enough, beautiful even, but she couldn't forget the look of horror that had crossed Camilla's face. James had left early for a client meeting, kissing her goodbye and reassured her once again that Camilla's reaction was probably just a case of mistaken identity or perhaps some medication she was taking. But Catherine's intuition told her there was much more to the story, and she found herself unable to concentrate on anything else. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah asking how she was feeling, followed by several missed calls from her mother, who had apparently heard about the engagement through the social grapevine that connected their small but well-connected community. Catherine ignored them all, instead finding herself drawn to her laptop. She wasn't sure what she was looking for exactly, but something compelled her to start researching. She began with James's family, typing his grandmother's name into various search engines. Eleanor Morrison had indeed been a prominent figure in local society, involved in numerous charitable organizations and social clubs throughout her life. Catherine found several old newspaper articles mentioning her attendance at various events, always elegantly dressed and photographed with other society ladies of her generation. But It was when she started looking into Camilla's background that things became more interesting. Camilla Whitmore had been born Camilla Fletcher, and she had grown up in the same social circles as James's grandmother. In fact, Catherine discovered several photographs from the 1980s and 1990s where both women appeared at the same charity events, sometimes standing side by side, smiling for the cameras. Catherine leaned back in her chair, a new theory forming in her mind. Perhaps Camilla and Eleanor had been friends, or at least acquaintances, and seeing the ring had brought back memories of the older woman. It would explain the emotional reaction, though not necessarily the intensity of it. Her phone rang, interrupting her research. The caller ID showed it was Margaret Shunn, another Foundation board member, and someone Catherine had always found easier to talk to than Camilla. "Catherine, dear, how are you this morning?" Margaret's warm voice came through the phone. "I wanted to call and congratulate you properly on your engagement. The ring is absolutely stunning." "Thank you, Margaret. That's very kind of you to say. I hope you don't mind me asking, but is Camilla all right?" "Several people mentioned that she seemed quite upset last night after seeing your ring. She left so abruptly that some of us were concerned." Catherine hesitated, unsure how much to share. "To be honest, I'm not really sure what happened. She had a very strong reaction when she saw my ring, but I have no idea why. James thinks she might have known his grandmother, since it was her ring originally." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Catherine could almost hear Margaret choosing her words carefully. "Catherine, I've known Camilla for over 20 years, and I've never seen her react to anything the way she did last night. She's always been so composed, so in control. For her to lose her composure like that in public, well, it must have been something very significant. Do you have any idea what it could have been?" Another pause. "I knew Eleanor Morrison, James's grandmother. She and Camilla moved in the same circles for many years. They were." Margaret seemed to struggle with how to phrase her next words. "They had a complicated relationship. There was some sort of falling out years ago, though I never knew the details. People didn't discuss such things as openly back then." Catherine felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of falling out?" "I'm not entirely sure, dear. This would have been in the early 1990s, I think. One day they were photographed together at charity events. The next they seemed to avoid being in the same room. There were whispers about some sort of scandal, but you know how these things get exaggerated over time." After ending the call with Margaret, Catherine found herself more determined than ever to understand what had happened. She returned to her laptop, this time searching more specifically for any connection between Eleanor Morrison and Camilla Fletcher in the early 1990s. It was slow going, but eventually she found a Society column from 1993 that mentioned both women in passing. The article was about a charity auction that had raised an unexpectedly large amount of money, and it mentioned that several prominent families had donated valuable items. The Morrison family had contributed a set of antique jewelry, including what was described as a stunning diamond engagement ring with significant sentimental value. Catherine's blood ran cold as she read the description. The ring that was now on her finger had been donated to charity in 1993, but James had told her it was a family heirloom that his grandmother had specifically left for him to use when he proposed. Her hands trembling slightly, she continued reading. The article mentioned that the auction had been organized by a committee that included both Eleanor Morrison and Camilla Fletcher, among others. At the bottom of the piece, there was a small note mentioning that several items had been withdrawn from the auction at the last minute due to family considerations. Catherine sat back, trying to make sense of what she was reading. Had the ring been donated and then withdrawn? Or was this a different piece of jewelry altogether? She needed more information, but she wasn't sure where to find it. The sound of her apartment door opening made her jump. James's voice called out from the entryway, earlier than she had expected him back. "Catherine, I'm back. The meeting finished early, so I thought we could grab lunch somewhere nice." She quickly closed her laptop, not wanting to explain what she had been researching. James appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking handsome as always in his navy suit, but she found herself studying his face more carefully than usual, searching for any sign of deception. "How was your meeting?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Productive. We should have the Peterson case wrapped up by the end of the week. He leaned down to kiss her, then frowned slightly. You look upset. Is everything still bothering you about last night? Catherine hesitated, torn between her desire to trust the man she was planning to marry and her growing suspicion that there was more to the story of her engagement ring than he had told her. James, can you tell me more about your grandmother's ring? I've been thinking about Camilla's reaction, and I'm wondering if there's something about its history that might explain why she was so upset. James's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, so quickly that Catherine might have missed it if she hadn't been watching for it. For just a moment, something flickered across his features that looked like guilt or perhaps fear. There's not much more to tell, really. It belonged to my grandmother, and she left it to me. I don't know all the details of its history before that. Do you know if she ever donated it to charity? I found an old article that mentioned the Morrison family donating jewelry to a charity auction in the early 1990s. This time, James's reaction was more obvious. He went very still, and Catherine could see him processing her words carefully before responding. Why are you researching my grandmother's jewelry, Catherine? That seems like an odd way to spend your morning after our engagement party. There was something in his tone that made Catherine feel defensive, as if she were being accused of something inappropriate. But she pressed on, unable to let it go. Because Camilla's reaction last night was so extreme that I can't stop thinking about it. She looked terrified when she saw this ring, James. People don't react that way to jewelry unless there's a significant reason. James sat down across from her at the kitchen table, his expression becoming more serious. Look, I can see that this is really bothering you, but I think you might be reading too much into an old woman's reaction. Maybe the ring reminded her of someone she lost, or maybe she was having some sort of medical episode. Either way, I don't think it's worth getting worked up about. But what about the charity auction article? Was this ring ever donated? James was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine could see him weighing his options. Finally, he sighed deeply. All right, yes. There was some discussion about donating various family pieces to charity back then. My grandmother was very generous and often contributed to worthy causes. But ultimately, she decided to keep the ring in the family. That's why I have it now. So it was going to be donated, but then wasn't? That's right. She changed her mind at the last minute. Catherine studied his face, trying to determine if he was telling her the whole truth. Something still didn't feel right about his explanation, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what was bothering her. James, did your grandmother and Camilla know each other well? Another pause, longer this time. I believe they were acquainted, yes. My grandmother knew many people in the community. Were they friends? I don't really know the details of their relationship, Catherine. My grandmother didn't often discuss her social connections with me. The conversation was interrupted by Catherine's phone ringing again. This time, the caller ID showed Sarah's name. I should take this, Catherine said, grateful for the interruption. Sarah? Catherine, I hope you don't mind me calling again, but I just had lunch with my Aunt Patricia, and she told me the most interesting thing about last night. She was at the gala, and she said she saw Camilla on the terrace after her episode. Apparently, Camilla was on her phone, having what Patricia described as a very intense conversation with someone. What kind of conversation? Patricia couldn't hear much, but she said Camilla kept saying something about the ring is back, and that someone needs to know. She thought it was strange enough to mention to me when she heard about Camilla's reaction to your engagement news. Catherine's heart began racing. She said, the ring is back. That's what Patricia thought she heard. Does that mean anything to you? Catherine glanced at James, who was pretending to read something on his phone, but was obviously listening to her side of the conversation. I'm not sure, but thank you for telling me. I'll talk to you later, okay? After hanging up, she looked at James expectantly, but he continued to stare at his phone screen as if nothing had happened. Did you hear that? She asked. Hear what? Sarah said that someone overheard Camilla on the phone last night, saying something about the ring is back. That doesn't sound like she was just nostalgic about your grandmother, James. It sounds like she was talking about this specific ring. James finally looked up from his phone, and Catherine was struck by how tired he suddenly appeared. There were lines around his eyes that she hadn't noticed before, and his usual confident demeanor seemed to have evaporated. "Catherine, I think you're making this into something bigger than it needs to be." "Am I? Because right now, it feels like there's something you're not telling me about this ring, and I'm starting to wonder what else you might not be telling me." The words hung between them like an accusation, and Catherine immediately regretted the harshness in her tone. But she was frustrated and confused, and she felt like the man she was supposed to marry was being less than honest with her. James stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "You're right. There are things about that ring that I haven't told you. But it's complicated, and I was hoping we could just move forward without having to dig up old family history." "What kind of things?" "The kind of things that happened a long time ago and don't really matter anymore." "They matter to me, James, and they obviously matter to Camilla. If I'm going to wear this ring for the rest of my life, don't you think I have a right to know its history?" James looked at her for a long moment, and Catherine could see him struggling with some internal decision. Finally, he sat back down and took her hands in his. "You're right. You do have that right. But the story isn't pretty, Catherine, and it involves people who are still alive, people we see regularly in our social circle. I was trying to protect you from getting caught up in old drama." "What kind of drama?" "The kind that could hurt people we care about and potentially damage the Foundation's reputation if it came out." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever James was about to tell her, she had a feeling it was going to change everything she thought she knew about the ring, about his family, and possibly about him. James took a deep breath and looked directly into Catherine's eyes, his expression grave. "What I'm about to tell you has been a family secret for over 30 years. My grandmother made me promise never to speak of it, but given what happened last night, I think you need to know the truth." Catherine felt her stomach tighten with anxiety, but she nodded for him to continue. "In 1992, my grandmother Eleanor was having an affair." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She had been expecting many things, but not this. Eleanor Morrison had always been portrayed as the perfect society wife, devoted to her husband and family, a pillar of moral respectability in their community. An affair? But your grandmother was always so. Catherine struggled to find the words. Prope. Respectable? Yes, that was the image she cultivated. But she was also human, and she was desperately unhappy in her marriage. My grandfather was a good man, but he was cold and distant, completely absorbed in his business. They had grown apart over the years, living essentially separate lives under the same roof. James stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the street below as he continued his story. The man she was involved with was married as well. They had met through their charity work, and what started as a professional relationship gradually became something more. They were discreet, or at least they thought they were, but in a community like ours, secrets have a way of coming to light. What does this have to do with Camilla? James turned back to face her, his expression pained. Camilla was the one who discovered the affair. She and my grandmother were working together on organizing that charity auction you found mentioned in the newspaper. They had become quite close during the planning process, and Camilla considered Eleanor a dear friend. Catherine felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place, though the picture they were forming was not one she wanted to see. Camilla found out about the affair by accident. She had gone to my grandmother's house one afternoon to drop off some documents related to the auction, and she walked in on Eleanor and her lover. They were in my grandfather's study, and there was no mistaking what was happening. "Oh my God," Catherine whispered, beginning to understand the magnitude of what James was telling her. Camilla was devastated, not just because of what she had witnessed, but because she felt personally betrayed. She had looked up to my grandmother, had considered her a role model of moral integrity. To discover that Eleanor was capable of such deception shattered something fundamental in Camilla's worldview. James returned to his seat, reaching for Catherine's hands again. But here's where it gets complicated. The man my grandmother was having an affair with was Camilla's husband. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the kitchen. Catherine stared at James, trying to process what he had just told her. Camilla's husband? The betrayal was even deeper than she had imagined. Richard Whitmore and my grandmother had been seeing each other for almost 2 years. Camilla had no idea. She thought she had a solid marriage, that her husband's frequent business trips and late meetings were exactly what they appeared to be. Finding them together in her friend's house destroyed two of the most important relationships in her life in a single moment. Catherine's mind raced as she tried to understand the implications. So, when Camilla saw my ring last night, she recognized it. Richard had given it to my grandmother as a token of his love. It was supposed to be their secret, a symbol of their relationship that only they would understand. My grandmother wore it on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her clothes, except when she was alone with Richard. But you said it was a family heirloom that belonged to your grandmother. James looked uncomfortable. That's what my grandmother told everyone after the affair ended. She claimed she had inherited it from her mother, and eventually, that became the official family story. But the truth is that Richard bought it for her from Tiffany in New York during one of his supposed business trips. Catherine stared down at the ring on her finger, which suddenly felt like it was burning her skin. So this ring was a symbol of adultery, of betrayal. And you gave it to me without telling me any of this. Catherine, please try to understand. That was over 30 years ago. The people involved are mostly gone now. Richard died 10 years ago, and my grandmother passed 5 years after that. The ring itself is just a beautiful piece of jewelry. Its past doesn't have to define its future, doesn't it? Catherine's voice was rising despite her efforts to stay calm. James, you gave me a ring that represents deception and betrayal. How could you think that was appropriate? Because I love you, and I wanted you to have something beautiful. The ring is stunning, and it has no power over our relationship unless we give it that power. Catherine stood up abruptly, pacing around the small kitchen as she tried to process everything James had told her. What happened after Camilla discovered the affair? How did it end? Camilla confronted both of them immediately. She demanded that Richard end the relationship and that my grandmother stay away from her family. She also threatened to expose the affair publicly if they didn't comply. And did they comply? They tried to. Richard broke off the relationship with my grandmother, but the damage to his marriage was irreparable. Camilla could never trust him again, and the betrayal had cut too deeply for forgiveness. They stayed married for appearance's sake, but they were essentially strangers living in the same house for the rest of their lives. Catherine thought about the Camilla she knew, the strong, controlled woman who commanded respect in their social circle. It was difficult to reconcile that image with the picture James was painting of a woman whose life had been devastated by betrayal. What about your grandmother? How did she handle losing Richard? She was heartbroken, but she also felt tremendous guilt about what she had done. She genuinely cared about Camilla and never intended for her to be hurt. My grandmother tried to apologize, tried to make amends, but Camilla refused to have any contact with her. Is that why they had their falling out? Yes. The charity auction was canceled that year because the organizing committee fell apart after the scandal broke. Well, not broke exactly, since very few people knew the real reason for the tension between Eleanor and Camilla. But their friendship was over, and they could never be in the same room again without the weight of what had happened hanging between them. Catherine sank back in her chair, feeling overwhelmed by the story James had told her. So last night, when Camilla saw this ring, she saw the symbol of the worst betrayal of her life. The ring that her husband had given to another woman, the tangible proof that her marriage and her friendship had been built on lies. The full impact of what had happened at the gala was beginning to hit Catherine. No wonder Camilla had reacted so violently to seeing the ring. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry to her. It was a reminder of the moment her world had fallen apart. James, how could you give me this ring knowing what it meant to Camilla? You had to know there was a chance she would see it eventually. James was quiet for a long moment before answering. I hoped she wouldn't recognize it. It's been over 30 years, and people's memories fade. I also thought that even if she did recognize it, she would be mature enough to handle it quietly. Mature enough? James, you essentially forced her to relive the worst moment of her life in public. At a charity event, surrounded by people from her social circle. How is that fair to her? I wasn't thinking about Camilla when I proposed to you, Catherine. I was thinking about us, about our future together. I wanted to give you something special, something that had meaning for my family. But it didn't have meaning for your family. It had meaning for your grandmother's affair. The argument that followed was unlike any they had ever had. Catherine found herself questioning not just James's judgment, but his character. How could the man she had fallen in love with, the man she had agreed to marry, have been so thoughtless about the pain his actions might cause? How could he have kept such a significant secret about something as important as her engagement ring? James, for his part, seemed genuinely surprised by the intensity of her reaction. He maintained that the ring's history was irrelevant to their relationship, that what mattered was their love for each other, not the circumstances under which he had acquired the ring. Do you still have feelings for me, or are you going to let a piece of jewelry that belonged to my dead grandmother ruin our relationship? He asked at one point, his frustration evident. This isn't about the ring, James. It's about the fact that you've been lying to me about something fundamental to our engagement. If you could lie about this, what else might you be hiding? I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you the complete history of a piece of jewelry that was given to me by my grandmother. There's a difference, is there? Because right now it feels like the same thing to me. Their argument was interrupted by Catherine's phone buzzing with a text message. It was from an unknown number, and the message was brief but chilling. We need to talk. There are things about that ring you don't know. Meet me at Riverside Park, North Entrance, for PM today. Come alone. See. Catherine showed the message to James, whose face went pale as he read it. You can't seriously be considering meeting with her, he said. Camilla is clearly unstable. Her reaction last night proved that. Her reaction last night was completely understandable given what you've just told me. James, I think I need to hear her side of the story. Her side of the story? Catherine, I've just told you exactly what happened. What more could she possibly add? I don't know, but she obviously thinks there's something I need to know. And given that you've already admitted to keeping secrets from me about this ring, I think I owe it to myself to get the complete picture. James grabbed her hands, his grip tight with desperation. Please don't do this. Whatever Camilla wants to tell you, it's going to be designed to hurt us. She's carried this grudge for over 30 years. She's not going to suddenly become concerned about your well-being. Maybe not, but I need to hear what she has to say. Catherine looked down at the ring again, this beautiful symbol of love that had turned into something so much more complicated. In the space of a few hours, it had become a symbol of betrayal, deception, and secrets that spanned decades. She needed to understand the full truth about what she was wearing, even if that truth was painful. If you go to meet her, I'm coming with you, James said firmly. No, she specifically said to come alone, and I think she has a right to tell her story without you there to contradict or influence her version of events. Catherine, please. I'm begging you not to do this. Whatever she tells you, it's going to be colored by 30 years of bitterness and resentment. She's not going to give you an objective account of what happened. Maybe not, but your account hasn't exactly been objective either, has it? You've had 30 years to craft a version of the story that makes your grandmother and your family look as sympathetic as possible. As 4 p.m. approached, Catherine found herself getting ready to meet the woman whose life had been shattered by the ring she now wore. She had no idea what Camilla wanted to tell her, but she suspected that whatever it was going to change everything she thought she knew about James, his family, and the true cost of the beautiful diamond that sparkled on her finger. The truth, as she was beginning to understand, was rarely as simple as it first appeared. And sometimes the most beautiful things carried the darkest secrets. The autumn air was crisp as Catherine walked through Riverside Park toward the north entrance, her heart pounding with each step. She had chosen to walk the 20 minutes from her apartment, needing the time to prepare herself for whatever Camilla was going to tell her. James had tried one last time to convince her not to go, but she had been firm in her decision. Too much had been hidden from her already, and she was determined to learn the complete truth. She spotted Camilla immediately, sitting on a bench near the fountain, looking smaller and more fragile than Catherine had ever seen her. The powerful, commanding woman from the foundation board meetings was gone, replaced by someone who looked every one of her 58 years, and then some. When Camilla saw her approaching, she stood up slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. "Thank you for coming," Camilla said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would. I needed to hear what you have to say," Catherine replied, sitting down on the bench beside her. "James told me about the affair, about what happened between your husband and his grandmother." Camilla's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Is that what he told you? That it was just an affair?" Catherine felt a familiar chill of unease. "What do you mean?" Camilla was silent for a long moment, staring out at the fountain where a few late-season ducks were swimming in lazy circles. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Did James tell you that I was pregnant when I discovered them together?" The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. Of all the details James had shared about the affair, he had never mentioned this. "No, he didn't tell me that. I was 4 months pregnant with our second child. Richard and I had been trying for years to have another baby after our daughter Emma. We had been as specialists, tried everything. When we finally succeeded, we were overjoyed. I thought it meant our marriage was getting stronger, that we were building something beautiful together." Catherine could hear the pain in Camilla's voice, still fresh after all these years. "What happened to the baby?" "I lost her 2 days after I found them together. The doctor said it was probably just one of those things that sometimes happen, that there was no specific cause. But I know it was the stress, the shock of what I had discovered. My body couldn't handle the betrayal." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. The tragedy was so much deeper than James had revealed. "I'm so sorry, Camilla. I had no idea. We were going to name her Grace. Richard picked the name. He said it was because she would bring grace into our lives." Camilla's voice broke slightly. "I've never spoken her name aloud since the day I lost her." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of Camilla's revelation settling between them. Catherine began to understand why the older woman's reaction to the ring had been so intense. It wasn't just a symbol of her husband's betrayal. It was connected to the loss of her child. "There's more," Camilla continued. "Things that James either doesn't know or chose not to tell you." "What things?" "The affair didn't end when I confronted them. Richard promised me it was over, swore on our daughter's life that he would never see Eleanor again. But it continued for another 6 months." Catherine's stomach dropped. "How do you know?" "Because I hired a private investigator. I needed to know if my husband was capable of keeping his word, of putting our marriage back together. What I discovered was that they had simply become more careful about hiding their relationship." Camilla reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, yellowed with age. The investigator documented everything. Hotel receipts, photographs, phone records. "I kept it all, though I'm not sure why. Maybe I needed proof that I wasn't going crazy, that my suspicions were justified." She handed the envelope to Catherine, who hesitated before opening it. Inside were dozens of photographs, hotel bills, and other documents dating from late 1992 through early 1993. The photographs showed Richard Whitmore and Eleanor Morrison entering and leaving various hotels and restaurants together, always careful to arrive and depart separately, always looking around nervously as if checking to see if they were being watched. "This was taken 3 weeks before the charity auction," Camilla said, pointing to a photograph of Eleanor and Richard sitting close together at a corner table in what appeared to be an expensive restaurant. "Look at her neck." Catherine looked closely and could see a delicate chain around Eleanor's neck, and hanging from it was unmistakably the diamond ring that was now on Catherine's finger. She wore it whenever they were together. It was like a secret symbol between them, a way of carrying his love with her even when they were apart. Catherine felt sick to her stomach. The ring had been more than just a gift. It had been a constant reminder of the affair, worn close to Eleanor's heart as she continued to betray her friend and destroy her marriage. The auction was supposed to be their last meeting, Camilla continued. Richard had finally agreed to end the relationship for good. Eleanor was going to donate the ring to the auction as a symbolic gesture, a way of letting go of what they had shared. But when the day came, she couldn't go through with it. So she kept the ring. She kept the ring, and she kept seeing my husband. The affair continued for another 6 months, until I finally had enough evidence to force the issue. Catherine looked up from the photographs. What did you do? I confronted Richard with everything the investigator had found. I told him that if he didn't end the relationship immediately and permanently, I would not only divorce him, but I would make sure that everyone in our social circle knew exactly why our marriage was ending. And that worked. It worked because Richard's law practice depended heavily on his reputation in the community. If word had gotten out that he was having an affair with a client's widow, while his own wife was pregnant and then grieving the loss of their child, it would have ruined him professionally as well as socially. Camilla took the envelope back from Catherine and carefully tucked it away. Eleanor fought him on it. She actually came to my house and begged me to let them continue their relationship. She said they were in love, that what they had was real and meaningful. She seemed genuinely shocked that I couldn't understand why she would want to hold on to something so beautiful. What did you tell her? I told her that her idea of beauty had cost me my marriage, my friendship, and my daughter. I told her that if she ever contacted Richard again, or if I ever saw her wearing that ring in public, I would make sure that everyone knew exactly what kind of woman she really was. Catherine was beginning to understand the full scope of the tragedy that had unfolded 30 years ago. It wasn't just an affair that had ended a marriage and a friendship. It was a series of decisions and betrayals that had cost a woman her child and left scars that had never healed. Is that why Eleanor eventually gave the ring to James? To get rid of it? Camilla shook her head. Eleanor never gave the ring to James. She was buried with it 5 years ago. Catherine felt the world tilt around her. What do you mean she was buried with it? James said she left it to him specifically for when he decided to propose. James is lying to you, Catherine. Eleanor Morrison was buried wearing that ring. I attended her funeral, and I saw it on her finger in the casket. The family made a point of mentioning that she was being buried with her most precious possession, the ring that had meant so much to her. Catherine's mind raced as she tried to process this new information. If Eleanor had been buried with the ring, then how did James kind of have it? Or had he really gotten the ring that was now on her finger? There's something else you need to know, Camilla continued. About 6 months ago, there were reports of vandalism at Greenwood Cemetery, where Eleanor is buried. Several graves were disturbed, and while the police downplayed it publicly, I have a friend who works for the cemetery. She told me that Eleanor's grave was one of the ones that was broken into. The implications of what Camilla was suggesting were too horrible for Catherine to fully accept. You're saying that I'm saying that the ring on your finger was stolen from a dead woman's grave. And I'm saying that the man you're planning to marry is capable of much more deception than you realize. Catherine felt like she was going to be sick. She looked down at the ring, which suddenly felt heavy and cold against her skin. The idea that James had desecrated his own grandmother's grave to retrieve a piece of jewelry was beyond anything she could have imagined. Why are you telling me this? She asked weakly. Because you deserve to know the truth about what you're wearing. And because Camilla paused, her voice becoming even quieter. Because I've spent 30 years watching Eleanor's family benefit from the Morrison Foundation, a charity that was built partly on the reputation and social connections that my husband's affair helped her maintain. James has been the golden child of that foundation, the heir to a legacy that was built on lies and betrayal. Catherine stood up abruptly, pacing away from the bench, and then returning. This is too much. I can't. I don't know what to believe anymore. I know it's a lot to take in. But, Catherine, I've seen the way James operates. He's charming and successful, but he has his grandmother's capacity for deception. The fact that he would give you that ring, knowing its history, knowing that I would eventually see it, it tells me that he either doesn't care about the pain he causes others, or he's so narcissistic that he believes his own version of reality. What am I supposed to do with this information? Even if everything you're telling me is true, what am I supposed to do? Camilla reached out and gently touched Catherine's arm. You're supposed to protect yourself. You're supposed to ask yourself if you can build a marriage on secrets and lies. You're supposed to consider whether the man you love is capable of the honesty and integrity that a real partnership requires. Catherine sank back onto the bench, feeling overwhelmed by everything she had learned. 2 days ago, she had been the happiest woman alive, engaged to a wonderful man, and looking forward to a bright future. Now she was questioning everything she thought she knew about the person she had agreed to spend her life with. "There's one more thing," Camilla said softly. "If you decide to confront James about what I've told you, be prepared for him to deny it all. Be prepared for him to paint me as a bitter old woman who's been harboring a grudge for 30 years. He'll probably tell you that I'm making everything up because I can't let go of the past." "Are you?" Camilla smiled sadly. "I suppose that's something you'll have to decide for yourself. But I will say this. I've carried the weight of these secrets for 3 decades. I've watched James build his career and his reputation on the foundation of his family's supposed respectability. When I saw that ring last night, I realized that the lies were continuing into another generation. What about the evidence he showed me? The photographs and hotel receipts? They're all real. You can have them authenticated if you want. You can also check the cemetery records about the vandalism. The information is all there if you know where to look for it." As the sun began to set over the park, Catherine found herself sitting in silence with a woman whose life had been destroyed by the same ring that now symbolized her own engagement. The irony was not lost on her that 30 years later, the same piece of jewelry was once again causing pain and confusion in the lives of people who had never asked to be part of its dark history. "What happened to your daughter, Emma?" Catherine asked suddenly, realizing that in all of Camilla's story, she had never mentioned what had become of her surviving child. Camilla's expression softened for the first time since they had begun talking. "Emma is a doctor now, living in Seattle with her husband and 2 children. She knows nothing about any of this. I made sure that she grew up believing her father was a good man who loved his family. Some secrets are meant to protect the innocent. Do you ever regret keeping the truth from her?" "Every day. But I also know that some knowledge is too heavy for one person to carry." Emma had the right to a childhood free from the weight of her parents' failures. As Catherine prepared to leave the park, she realized that she was facing the same choice that Camilla had made 30 years ago. She could confront the truth, painful as it might be, or she could choose to live with comfortable lies. The difference was that Camilla had discovered the truth by accident, while Catherine was being given the choice of whether or not to seek it out. "Whatever you decide to do," Camilla said as they parted ways, "remember that you deserve better than secrets and half-truths. You deserve a love that doesn't require you to ignore your own instincts about what's right and wrong." As Catherine walked home through the gathering darkness, the weight of the ring on her finger seemed to grow heavier with each step. By the time she reached her apartment building, she had made her decision about what she needed to do next. The truth, however painful it might be, was always preferable to a beautiful lie. And if the man she loved was capable of the deceptions that Camilla had described, then she needed to know that before she committed her life to him. The ring that had started as a symbol of love and commitment had become something much more complex, a test of her own strength and judgment, and a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things carry the darkest histories. Whether her relationship with James could survive the complete truth remained to be seen, but Catherine was determined to find out exactly what kind of man she had agreed to marry, even if the answer was not what she hoped to hear.